Yeah, well, thank you very much for sticking with us for the last talk of the day. I'm sure you'll agree with me, it's very much worth your time. We are joined by John Murray, who's the Chief Football Correspondent and Commentator for 5 Live. And I'm sure a lot of you in here will think he's got one of the best jobs in the business, so he's going to tell you a little bit about that. So please, everybody, welcome John Murray.
Thank you.
So John, we've been having a bit of a chat about the kind of things you've been up to in the last few weeks. Obviously down in Tottenham yesterday, Champions League draw this morning, in Marseille last week. Sounds pretty hectic at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's well. Thanks very much for coming along, first of all. And I mean, it is. I do sometimes have to pinch myself in the places that we end up. And I was just explaining to you, wasn't there, that in 2 weeks' time today we'll be in Qatar, having just watched England's first match at the World Cup. So. It takes you to all sorts of incredible places that I would never have expected to go to, and the other side of that, as well as doing that, I find the job that I do is a constant challenge, really. And even though I've done it now for quite a long time, it still throws up the same challenges, and it still provides the same disappointments, but also the same highs as well. And you know, it's a genuinely exciting profession to be involved in. So those of you who are thinking of getting involved in football commentary in your careers, and I know at least one of you are thinking about doing that, then you know I could only say go for it and try and get there, because you will not be disappointed.
And I know we're going to have a quick look at some of the notes you had from yesterday's game. So when you were covering Liverpool versus Spurs, at 4:30 yesterday.
Yep.
So I think we've got your notes, and we've got a bit of the audio, because I know you're going to take us through a bit about how you get on doing that.
I'll sort of talk you through it as we do it. So this is actually, Darren, if you go back to that's the one. Yeah. So that is. So basically, when I get ready to commentate on a football match, it'll take me. It'll take me most of a day to get ready for a match, and every commentator does it in a different way, and it is remarkable how different people, how many different ways people can find to do effectively the same thing. So if you watched any of my colleagues' commentary, you know, whether it's Guy Mowbray or Ian Dennis or whoever it happened to be, you would see more or less the same things, but in a very different way. And the way I do it is I do write it out, because it's just something that from my school days, really, just getting used to writing things down, and this is how I do it. So, for example, Kulusevski, who made his comeback yesterday. So I've got information on here which will include how many caps he's got for Sweden, where he was born, how many goals he scored last season, the previous clubs he played for, when he moved to Tottenham, what the circumstances are. There's an L there that shows he's on loan. He's missed the last 10 matches with a thigh injury. He's started 6 games and come on as a substitute in 3 for Spurs this season. So that's the kind of detail I'm going into for every player. But I'm not using this. You know, I'm using a tiny amount of this. And for Kulusevski, he is one where a certain amount of that I will have mentioned yesterday during the game, because he was particularly newsworthy yesterday when he was making his return and played a big part for Tottenham in the latter part of the game yesterday. But for somebody else, like for Brian Hill, who doesn't come on the field at all, you know, that is totally unused in the match. And that's pretty much how it is with the rest of the notes as well. It's just a feeling. When I'm preparing for a commentary match, I don't feel right unless I've done this. But I've done it now for long enough to know that actually I do feel I could just turn up, get the team sheet and commentate. But I feel better, much better, because of the fact that I've got all this there beside me. And I always say it feels a little bit like going into an exam with your notes when you have it all. So that's what I'll have on the 2 sets of teams. And what's the next one? This is the background information on the two teams involved, so Tottenham and Liverpool. So I'm doing things like all down here, those are the previous lineups that Liverpool and Tottenham played in the Champions League last midweek, and the little ticks there, I'll do that when I get the team news through and the confirmed teams, and so that's just ticking off who started both matches. Things like this, I have written in advance to what will happen if Liverpool win, if Liverpool draw, if Liverpool lose. And then there's a bit of general information about current form and statistical bits and pieces that I may or may not use, what they did last season, a bit of history there, what they've won, and down there, the stuff on the manager and his various achievements. And so again, with this kind of thing, I'm only using, probably maybe 3 or 4 sentences out of all of that. The things that were relevant yesterday were Spurs have gone behind first in their last 5 matches, and in 9 of their last 12, they've conceded the first goal. And then, of course, they concede the first goal yesterday. Liverpool go ahead. So that instantly becomes relevant. So therefore, I use it. So that's what I'm trying to do. I've prepared all of this in advance, but I'm trying to only use what is really relevant and what will be interesting, I hope, to people who are listening to the commentary. So that's that one. And what else have I got? Yeah, and this is, I'll do this on sort of half a page of A4. So before the match, this is completely blank. And when the teams come, and what happens is we've got a very clever app from the Premier League, which gives us the teams 15 minutes before they're actually announced, which is a great innovation. That's quite, we never used to have this. It used to be scrambling around, teams would come through. Now we actually do have a 15-minute window where we get the teams in advance. So I can basically write out the team lineups in the way that I do there. So I've done them in formation style, which I've done for as long as I've commentated. I've done this, and this is all done in that hour and a quarter before the match actually begins. And what I find that does is, it means that I've just gone through the process there of writing down who's playing and what number they are and where they're going to be playing on the field. And it's amazing, it's just become like an automatic thing for me, in that if I've got this in my hand and I'm not certain, I know exactly where to look on my bit of paper to know who's going to be where in what position if I'm in doubt. And one thing that has really thrown us, all of us, I think, in the last couple of years is now 5 substitutes, which is a major change. And it means that potentially half of both teams is changing during the course of the game. And honestly, I think it's going to drive me mad by the time we get to the end of this, because it's just somebody's gone, someone comes on, and it's just like the change of personnel is a real challenge to the commentary. But so that's what I'll have in one hand. This again is a blank piece of paper that just before the start of the match. This is what I'm keeping a note of what's happening. So it's very much scribbled. All I've written there is Højbjerg. Whatever he did, I can't remember now. In fact, that was the follow-up. Perisic had a header, deflected against the post, came out to Højbjerg, and he had a shot that was saved. And that's just so I can keep a mental track on what's happened and when it happened during the game. So I know that Liverpool went 1-0 up, Liverpool went 2-0 up, and then Tottenham got this goal back there. So at the end of the match, I can just look back at that, and if, as often is the case on the airwaves, somebody will say to it, just sum it up in 40 seconds, and I can use this to base that on. And I also keep a note, like Glenn Murray at the top. It was Glenn Murray who was with us for the commentary yesterday. Just a little note on that. I do tend to write that down as well. And then on the other bit of paper, so this is on the back of the team lineups that I've written out. This I will have prepared in advance, and this is everything else that was appearing on the programme yesterday on 5 Live, so the various other sporting events that we've got. So I'm filling that in really as the afternoon's going on. Again, we'll probably reference most of that, and certainly matches that are going on during the course of the commentary that I'm doing, like England-Argentina was being played. I think it just finished So Chris Jones was reporting on that. Dave Woods was at Tonga Samoa in the rugby league. And then also another important aspect of it, those of you who move into broadcasting, you'll find this, it is all about trailing ahead and giving people a reason to listen again and continue listening to whichever broadcaster you're working for. So all this is what's coming up on 5 Live, and this here is all of the World Cup chat to try and just underline what we're going to be doing in the World Cup over the course of the next month or so. And then also up in that corner up there, what else is happening? Like the 606 phone in, the BBC Sport website, Match of the Day, podcast. Again, it's all about messages, but you know, the most important thing is the commentary. The match is the most important thing. So therefore, it's important, I feel, not to get too sidetracked by everything else, because people really have tuned in to find out what's happening during the football match. So that's the most important thing.
And you mentioned a lot of this stuff we got at the bottom here about trailing and mentioning all the other scores. Has commenting on a game got a lot more difficult in the last 10, 15 years? Or has it always been a lot of these kinds of things?
I think pretty much you've always had that to one extent or another. Like when I first started out in local radio, and I was working in commercial local radio, we had to mention 2 of the local Ford garages in the commentary in each half. So you had to put them in. There's always something. We do a thing on a Friday afternoon on 5 Live, which is a little sort of little quiz thing that we do, where we're asked a question about the match that we're covering. And part of that is that there'll be a footballing fact that we've got to put into the commentary. So that's something else, which can be tricky. Like I think I had to do it during Liverpool-Manchester City the other week when it was all kicking off, and you've only got a very limited amount of time, so it's just a case of just getting it in, and getting on with the match really. But that's what you find. You do find that as a commentator, you will be asked to do all manner of things, and I know you're going to be seeing Mark Chapman, aren't you, tomorrow? And I always say to Mark, as a broadcaster, at some stage or other during the course of your career, the management, are going to make you look like an absolute idiot. So, and however they do it, they will do it. So that's just part of life.
And I know you mentioned you had Glenn Murray yesterday. How important is it, that relationship with the...
Very, very important. And, you know, we're quite fortunate in the whole time that I've done this, really. The standard of the former players, or indeed current players and managers that we use for a commentary, I almost always have a player manager, maybe more than one, sitting next to me for a match. And you know, from a radio point of view, I always say what I'm trying to do is describe what is happening, and it's that picture, you know, try and provide a picture in people's minds of what it is that I'm watching, not just the match and the circumstances, and as I say, the most important thing is the match. What's the score? That's what people want to know when they switch on the radio. So you never lose sight of that, but I also want to give a picture of where I am, what's it like. And that's what I like about working on the radio as opposed to the TV, because it's a bit of a flight of fancy, really, and you can use your imagination and you can kind of go wherever you want to go. Whereas on TV, you're very restricted to what is being shown on the screen and what people can see. And on TV, as a commentator, really you're trying to put a caption to what's appearing on the television. Whereas on the radio, you can actually go wherever you want. You can go wherever you want. If it's not a very good game, sometimes the most enjoyable commentaries to do as a broadcaster are the ones where the game's not very good and there's not much happening, and you can have a bit of chat and a bit of two-way and a bit of byplay with the summariser and make it a completely different sort of broadcast. Whereas I know in 2 weeks' time, when I'm commentating on England against Iran, anyone who's listening to that who is an England fan is absolutely, they want, you know, I'm very conscious of the fact that is going to have to be very, very focused on what is happening. And that's the case whenever the stakes are high and whenever it's a really big game, you're conscious of that as well. And it's about getting the balance, which you don't always get the balance right. Sometimes you're too far one way than you are the other way. But that's what I said right at the outset about it being a constant challenge and trying to find the right balance and to make it sound right.
And I think we're just going to play a little bit out of that.
Yeah, so this was this was round about the start of the match. So all of the notes, everything that I've done to prepare, it ends up with sounding a bit like this.
Højbjerg, Bentancur and Bissouma, and then Perisic and Kane in the absence of Son. Kulusevski is on the bench, if you didn't hear that earlier, as he comes back from injury. Referee's Andy Madley, he blows his whistle, and Tottenham will play from right to left in the first half. It's Liverpool who get us underway in the all-red kit, and Thiago's given the ball away to Højbjerg on the halfway line. Now here's Bentancur, who curls it over the top, but Højbjerg was in an offside position, so he didn't chase it. And it's through to Alisson, who is the Liverpool goalkeeper. Then the back four of Alexander-Arnold, Konate, Van Dijk and Robertson. And then in midfield, Fabinho with Elliott and Thiago. And then Firmino, Salah and Nunez. So there's another one of those contests where we have Harry Kane on one side and Mo Salah on the other. And the World Service join us as well. The BBC World Service listeners, welcome to you, wherever you are, to the sparkling home of Tottenham Hotspur, where Liverpool are in possession, playing the ball out towards Robertson on the left-hand side, who goes back into his own half. So it is Tottenham 0, Liverpool 0, and it's Glenn Murray, Premier League goal scorer with Brighton and Crystal Palace and Bournemouth, who is with us here in the superb commentary position high up on the dressing room side of the ground. Glenn.
Yes, we were just saying that before the game, weren't we, John? How comfortable is he compared to some of the grounds?
So there you are. So that's how it all comes together, and that's, you know, in actual fact, in that little section there, I'm conscious of the fact that when we pick that up, I'm just bringing the Tottenham, just running through the Tottenham team news. So then kickoff comes, and then I'm running through the Liverpool team news. So in actual fact, that little section there, and when you heard from Glenn for the first time since the match began, really, there's not a lot of commentary in there, in that section. You know, I've described maybe 2 small passages of play, but that's often the way in the early stages, and you're still setting the scene there, really. So that's how it works.
Fantastic. I'll let you take a chance to take a seat.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about the World Cup and preparing for that England game against Iran, and obviously the rest of the tournament. What are your thoughts heading into the World Cup?
Yeah, well, it's as you'll be very well aware. You know, there's so much surrounding this World Cup, and it's providing quite a challenge actually, because, and I've been there. I went there for the draw in April, so I had a little bit of an idea of what it's going to be like, and I had been previously because England played there against Brazil probably about 15 years ago. So I thought it was going to be very different there. And, you know, I still remember how I felt when the paper came out of the envelope. I think it was 2010. And, you know, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that Qatar had been awarded the World Cup. And at that stage, we didn't know what we know now. You know, whether it was the investigations that have gone into how it is that Qatar were actually awarded the World Cup, and also the human rights aspect of things as well. So there's a lot to take in here, and I think it's so important that we don't lose sight of that. And the football, once it starts and we get 4 matches a day for the early stages of the tournament, the football will kind of take care of itself. But I think, you know, the BBC will be sending out a team of sports news reporters, and so will every other media organisation, and there will be very close scrutiny on what's happening and how things are on the ground. But I feel it's important as well during the course of the actual event to make sure that we don't overlook this aspect to it, because I think it needs to be highlighted. And after all, when we are going there, you know, I know that, well, I have been asked the question, and I will be asked the question in the next fortnight. If you do feel uncomfortable about it, why are you going? Why don't you say, well, look, I don't want to go? But I think it is important. I think it's important to go, A, to chronicle the event, and B, to experience and see what it's like and tell people what we are seeing and how we're finding it. And I know, because we're in Russia 4 years ago, I know what happened there, and I do feel that we were sports washed to an extent in Russia, but at the same time, travel does broaden the mind, and we traveled to all sorts of places in Russia, places that you'd never expect to go to, and met a lot of people on the ground, and got a good idea, I think, of how people felt in Russia at the time. And it's, for me, and all of us who went there, it's fascinating now to look back on what we did 4 years ago, where we went, what people said to us, how people felt about Putin, now that things have come to the point that they're at now. So going back to Qatar, I think we need to very, very much keep in mind how we felt and how we reacted to what was happening in Russia in a different way with how things are in Qatar. And I suspect it might be very different for the course of the month in Qatar compared to how it, in inverted commas, normally is. Maybe it won't be, but we will only find that out from being on the ground.
And in terms of being someone in the media, do you know what the facilities are going to be like? So I know we had somebody here a few years ago, went to Brazil, and they built like a cardboard city in various bits where people were able to work. Are the facilities quite good out there from what you've seen so far? Yeah,
very good, and everything's very... the two positive things about this are, I think, that what we will have is all of the countries and all of the supporters of all of the teams in the same city, which is something I've never experienced before. It was a little bit like that in Moscow at the start of the World Cup when supporters would come into Moscow before going off to the other venues. So we had that in the days leading up to that World Cup, and it was quite an experience. But I think for the whole of the World Cup, to have all of the spectators in the same place, I think will be very interesting, and also to compare their experiences. And because you cannot fail at a World Cup, I don't know if any of you have actually experienced that, but if you've been there, it's an unreal experience to go there and just mix with so many different people from so many different places and so many different backgrounds. But at the same time, at this World Cup, those people are going to have to be relatively well off. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to afford to go to this World Cup, which is another side of it as well, in that it's a World Cup really that caters only for the spectators that can afford to be there.
Yeah. And in terms of when the football actually gets going, how are you feeling about it in terms of the fact, obviously, it's a mid-season World Cup, but it's extremely compressed first half to the season. We've had quite a lot of players who are going to find themselves injured, whereas normally they would have a bit of time to recover. What do you think the actual football is going to be like?
Well, it certainly doesn't feel right, does it? You probably think the same thing, that we've got a World Cup coming up in a fortnight's time when we're right in the thick of the football season, and we've never experienced that before, that a World Cup should be now. It feels to me like the World Cup should be almost a treat or a festival at the end of a season during the course of the summer. But obviously this one is different, and it will take place where it's taking place. And actually, I know there's a lot of talk about injuries at the moment, but I think whenever the World Cup's being played, squads and teams have injuries. And when you look at the injuries that England currently have, for example, and Wales to an extent for that matter, I haven't checked this, but I don't think that the injury situation is any worse or any better than it has been for other tournaments. So they'll just have to deal with it, and they'll have to get through it. But when I was there in April, with England having done so well at recent tournaments, getting to the final and the semi-final of the last two World Cup and European Championship tournaments, it's standing in Qatar, you do think, could England really win the World Cup here? With the temperature that it is and with everything thrown in, but somebody's got to win it. And in actual fact, when the young England teams, the under-17s and the under-20s, won their World Cups back in 2017, one of them won it in India, in Kolkata, and the other one won it in South Korea, which are also places that you would have thought, well, could England really win here? And they did. But I think it's quite a jump at the moment to think that England could actually take that next step and win it.
And just looking back over your career, is there any one moment, you mentioned at the beginning, lots of people would like to do the kind of job you do, where you sit there and you go, wow, this is just an absolutely amazing time to be here. I can't believe that this is what I get paid to do.
Yeah, and my background, I come from a farming family in Northumberland, and there were no journalists, broadcasters, not in my family, not absolutely at all. And like I'm sure most of you, absolutely sports mad when I was growing up. Love my football, love my cricket, golf as well. And, you know, what I do has opened up the possibility for me to go to World Cups, Euros, Olympics, Ryder Cup, Open, Masters, you know, and be there. And as I say, not just be there, it's have a role that really fulfills while you're actually at the event as well. So, you know, it feels sometimes a bit like a flight of fancy that you know, I ended up being in some of the places that I've been.
One of the less flights of fancy was you mentioned before about getting home at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
After driving back from Tottenham Stadium yesterday.
Yeah.
So what are the kind of things you have to sacrifice in order to be successful?
Yeah, I think that, you know, in this job, I mean, you know as well from as being a working journalist, and certainly if you're working in sport, one of the things that maybe you don't think about at the time is, and I know probably we all like playing sport as well, you kind of have to sacrifice that because you end up working at the weekend. And it's very difficult to commit, certainly if it's team sport that you're playing, it's very difficult, I've found, to actually commit to a team sport to continue playing. Yet when I first started, one of the great pieces of advice I had from the great former cricket commentator, Christopher Martin Jenkins, when I was in my teens, he told me, while you still can, play as much sport as you can, because that gives you a greater appreciation for sport. So when you eventually work in writing or broadcasting about sport, then you've got a greater and better idea of what it's all about. But you do have to make that sacrifice, I think. I think it's very difficult to commit to playing sport. And also, working at weekends, you're working unsociable hours. Like, for instance, yesterday being at Tottenham, you know, I'm on the motorway for probably 10 or 12 hours over the course of Saturday and Sunday, driving there and back. Ended up at about midnight this morning. I was pulling into the services of the A1 and having a sleep in the car. So, you know, because I had to stop. So I'm in my car outside of McDonald's off the A1, having a sleep for 20 minutes so that I can get going and get home at 1 o'clock this morning. So, you know, I'm not moaning about it, and I would never moan about it because that's part of the game that we do. And that's, you know, I've done it for so long that I'm used to doing that. So I know when I'm driving up the A1 and I'm feeling a little bit drowsy, I know that I've got to do that. Otherwise, I won't be going to Tottenham again.
And I'll just ask you one last question before I hand over to these guys, because I'm sure they'll have plenty of questions for you. If you were able to give them one piece of advice for their careers for the future, what do you think you would be telling them?
I think if anyone's interested in being a football commentator, what I would say is that more than ever now, there's an absolute mountain of statistics, you know, and I'm saying that as someone who spends all that time writing them down before a game. But it's almost too much. Well, it's not almost too much. It is too much. There's far too much. And they are there. Those statistics are there for absolutely anyone. So any commentator, anyone who's covering the match can see all of those statistics and can work them out for yourself. I think what I find more interesting to listen to is what actually comes out of your head in your own imagination. And the words that you use, remember, as broadcasters, journalists, words are the most important tools that you've got. So use them well. But try and be different. That's what I would say. You know, it's very easy to be samey and very similar, and I think it's easier to do that now than it ever has been before because you've got all of that information and all of the statistics. But you know, try and think, what can I do? What do I do? How can I sound to make me different? And you know, very often that comes out of your own imagination. So that's the piece of advice I think I would give.
That's it. Right, so if anybody's got a question, if you just put your hand up.
Come, Alex.
So, John, in terms of in terms of your environment and where you're commentating, obviously you mentioned you were at Tottenham yesterday. Tottenham, very flash stadium, you know, like the Emirates, the Etihad. Do you prefer that, or do you prefer like the old traditional grounds like a Goodison Park or an Elland Road?
I love going to the modern stadiums, and I mean that at Tottenham, they are the best facilities that we have currently. and it's a great commentary position because it's high, but you're also quite close to the pitch in terms of distance. So it's not like Liverpool, for example, in the new stand at Liverpool, we're very, very high. So you've got a great aerial view, but you are a long way away, whereas Tottenham's probably just about right. But at the same time, I absolutely love going to the old grounds, probably because I don't do it all the time and I only do it occasionally. And when I do go there, I know that next week I might be going back to Tottenham again. So I love it in the FA Cup when you go to, I love going to places I've never been before, and I quite like a little bit of a challenge when it comes to those matches. And very often in FA Cup grounds, non-league grounds, for example, you're in a very low commentary position, which makes it a different sort of challenge to try and pick out what's happening. But I'm a great one for tradition, great one for footballing tradition. And I always say, you very ever, in fact, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, do you know what I absolutely hate? Tradition. Everyone loves tradition. And therefore, I do love it when FA Cup time comes around, So a bit of everything is the answer, I think.
Hi, John. I was wondering, so you've been in some of the biggest stadiums in the world, especially in the country, and with massive atmospheres, people shouting all over the place. How do you keep your concentration and keep your eyes on the game when there's just so much sound going on?
Yeah, and other things can be happening as well. Like, so last week when we were in Marseille, it was a very high commentary position. We were quite a long way away, but it wasn't too bad. But when Marseille came out, white kit, and they're wearing quite faint gold numbers. So that did worry me because I'd watched quite a bit of Marseille as well in advance of that, and I knew that from a distance many of their players are quite similar, and also the numbers. I mean, it was an amazing set of numbers last week in that there was an 11, a 27, and a 21. And a 10 and a 70, i.e. all numbers that from distance actually look quite similar on the shirts. And what also happened was, very often, but not always, we will have TV screens in the commentary position. And we had quite a big television actually in the commentary position last week. So I thought, well, that'll be all right. But when the match started, the wrong pictures were on the screen. So then the pictures on the screen were a kind of like goal service type TV program, French TV program, and every time it showed our match, it was from about 3 minutes ago, which was incredibly distracting. And anyway, they got that sorted out after about 20 minutes. But that's when you're talking about concentration. That's one last week where I thought, I'm going to have to concentrate here, like I don't normally, more than I normally do. And generally you don't get put off by the crowd, because the crowd's a great thing, as we discovered during the pandemic when we're sitting in football grounds commentating without any crowds, which was a real battle actually. And you realise how important the crowd is actually to the sound of a football commentary, particularly on the radio. So I definitely got a greater appreciation of it because of the time that it wasn't there. But I think generally, it's like anything, I'm doing my job. I'm sitting there, I'm doing my job. So you're trying to make it sound as though you are in control and you are enjoying what you're seeing, or you're giving a fair reflection of what you're seeing. But at the same time, sometimes you are having to really battle to concentrate on what you're doing.
I've got 2 questions for you, John. The first one is, what's your favorite match that you ever commentated to?
Okay.
And if you're going to the World Cup, who's going to win the World Cup? And it's only one right answer.
Okay. Well, favourite match I've ever commentated on, I mean, there's an absolute stack of them. A couple that come to mind, the Champions League final in Kiev was an incredible match. I mean, just it Real Madrid won it, so you know, from a business point of view, it would have been better if it had been Liverpool. But the things that happened in that match were amazing. The whole collection, topped off by some amazing goals as well, and mistakes, goals. The fact that we were in Kiev at the time, again, thinking now, to think we were at the Champions League final in Kiev in what, 2018? So 5 years ago. And you know, there's never any hint that what's happened now would happen then. So that's one I would pick out. I would pick out as well when England beat Colombia on penalties in Moscow at the World Cup. Not a great game, but a lot of pressure. And before anybody asks the question about which team I support, I actually don't support a team. I don't have a strong following, never really have done. I've always had teams that I've been interested in. So that has made it quite straightforward, really, from that point of view as a football commentator, and until it came to the point where I'm commentating on England, where I do feel like I've got a vested interest because I'm English. So, you know, that match, when it came to a penalty shootout at the World Cup, and to be sitting describing it, it did feel very different for me. And the fact that they got through that and then went on to reach the semi-finals at that World Cup, that was one I would pick out for very different reasons. And who's going to win the World Cup? Maybe, I'm thinking at the moment, Brazil, Argentina, possibly Spain, or France, obviously. So very obvious. In my opinion. Very obvious. But the other one I would say is the Netherlands as well, I think, because they've not lost under Louis van Gaal yet. So long unbeaten run, and very often teams that have a long unbeaten run when they're coming into a tournament, like Italy did last summer, tend to do okay. So, and they might play England in the second round as well. So.
Coming home.
Hi, John. You said earlier about how much more freedom you have when you're doing radio commentary to what you would on TV. What do you think are the main differences? Because the brief bit of commentary I've done, I did it on my own. So, like you said, you can bounce off.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to bounce off someone. And also, mine was highlights that were going out 2 days after the game, and I felt like I was rushing because you want to say what's in front of you, but one, they've got highlights, and two, they've probably seen, it was full match highlights, so they've probably seen 2 minutes of it, so they know what's going to happen, so they don't need to hear every player's name. I just wanted to know, what advice would you have to...
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in that, and you know, my career, the vast majority of my career, I've done radio commentary, and I've done, you know, a certain amount of TV commentary, a certain amount of match of the day, which is doing exactly what you say there. So you're commentating on a whole match for only 3, 4, 5 minutes of highlights, and it can be a strange experience, that, as you've probably already discovered, in that you can be commentating on match of the day and think you've done an okay job, and then when you see the highlights, it sounds horrendous. But also the other way around, you can do it and commentate on the whole match and think that's not going to come out very well. And actually, it comes out okay because that's how it works when it's edited highlights. The other thing as well, as I described earlier, for radio, you have invariably got someone with you. So therefore, it's a natural experience. It's a natural interaction between you and whoever's sitting next to you, which I think is the beauty of radio, really. You know, it is the intimacy of radio, whatever it is, whether it's sport or whatever sort of speech radio or music radio that it is, that is the power of radio, that is the intimacy. TV is different because the gaps are there, and the gaps aren't natural. And if you talk all of the time on TV, you will be criticised for talking all of the time. So therefore you have to leave the gaps. Therefore it becomes unnatural. And when you're commentating by yourself, you know, I know exactly where you're coming from. Very often I'll be sitting there commentating on a match for match of the day, just commentating, and almost always at some point during a match, I'll think, I feel like I'm sitting here just talking to myself. And you just think, it just feels unnatural. So I think that's a real art in itself, to be able to be a good match of the day commentator or a commentator on highlights. And very often the people who make the decisions, the management, will think, well, he or she's a commentator. But in actual fact, there are a lot of different aspects to commentary, whether it's commentating on highlights, whether it's commentating on live matches, whether it's commentating on radio, whether it's commentating on radio by yourself, whether it's commentating on radio with someone, or whether you're commentating on TV with one person or with two people. Very often, sometimes you're with two people. And I think that actually breaks up what is a natural dynamic because of the fact that there's another person in there. So that's something else that you have to deal with as a commentator. So there's quite a lot in there to think about.
Hi, John.
Hello? Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah,
I know you just mentioned that you don't support a team, you don't follow a team, you normally just have interests. But I was going to ask anyway, as I was thinking about it, how do you deal with impartiality and avoiding being biased when you're commentating?
Yeah. Well, as you probably know, if you follow the media, with the BBC and impartiality, that's quite a big thing, and it has been for quite a while now, and it's very much one of the main issues facing the BBC, whether it's social media with Gary Lineker or whatever it happens to be. Certainly, as a news journalist, it's a slightly different game compared to sport, I think, because rather like with the issue of Qatar, for example, there's a finer line to tread there with Qatar, and because I think that it's very important to try and make sure that you are remaining impartial, but at the same time, there are certain areas, like with the issue of human rights, where you have to be on the one side of that argument, in my opinion. And I think in terms of actually covering sporting events, impartiality is so important because England, for example, I would never refer to we when I'm broadcasting. I would never refer to England as we, because I'm still a BBC journalist and I'm still having to, like in that Colombia game, I feel you've still got to be fair. What I want to do is whatever I'm doing, however I'm reporting or commentating, I do feel the need to be fair and to be able to give both sides of the story, really, and give both points of view, or all points of view that are involved in whatever it is that you're talking about. But I also know that if I'm commentating on England, the vast majority of the people who'll be listening to that commentary probably will be England fans. But at the same time, I could be commentating on Wales the next week. So if I'm, as I will do, commentating on England and Wales at the World Cup, that's got to be absolutely down the middle. That cannot be weighted one way or the other. And that brings you back to the original point, is why when it comes to England, that you can't be too gung-ho and patriotic when it comes to England, because at some point they're going to play Scotland and Wales. So, that's one way of looking at that. And from a club point of view, it does make me laugh how I will be accused by all of the top clubs of being biased, either for them or against them. To which point, I think, well, I must be doing something right if I'm getting criticised for being a Manchester United fan, no a Manchester City fan, no a Liverpool fan, no a Chelsea fan, no an Arsenal fan, no a Tottenham fan. So, it's just about finding the balance, and also what I find with football supporters is, as a commentator, it's my job to sound kind of excited when any team scores. So football supporters think, well, he got excited when Manchester United scored against Liverpool, therefore he's biased against Liverpool. So that's where I am with impartiality. But I mean, from a sporting point of view, the basic thing is just being fair. You've got to be fair to all sides, and just and you have to give an opinion with things like, sporting things like, is it a penalty or is it not a penalty? You've got to give an opinion. So that is an area where I think you have to give your opinion.
Hi. Oh, there you go. So I was just wondering, you said how you had to be different to kind of stand out, and I was just wondering how you broke through to commentating games.
Yeah, well, that was quite a simple one with me because of my accent, really, coming from the northeast of England. And again, it's a subject, hasn't it, that's reared its head. I don't know if you've seen over the course of the last week about regional accents in the media. And actually, the way it was portrayed in the last week was that people felt hard done to because of their accents, isn't it? I think that's how the story was portrayed. And I was sitting listening to that and thinking, actually, I really got my opportunity because I had a regional accent. And so this was sort of mid-90s when I moved from out of local radio into national media, and I moved to London. It just so happened that they had previously used someone from the northeast of England, but at that time there wasn't anyone in the national media at BBC Radio Sport who had a northeast accent. I had commentated on football, I had a northeast accent, and you know that's how it worked. You know, there's nothing. That was just a quirk of fate, an absolute quirk of fate. So anyone who's I always say to anyone who's got a regional accent, for goodness sake, don't try and lose it in order to sound like a commentator. And it's, you know, my accent now is not as strong as it used to be by any means, because it has sort of flattened out a bit, but it was much stronger when I was younger. So that was a big part of how I sounded different. And then after I got going, you then develop your own style. But with commentary, you can't rush it. That's another piece of advice I would give you. You know, you don't become, you're always going to copy commentators. That if you want to be a commentator, you're going to copy the commentators that you like. That's an inevitability. But you can't develop your own style overnight. It takes years and years of just doing commentary. I was saying to you, wasn't it? The more commentary that you do, just commentate, and you eventually develop your own style, and that's just how it works. You know, there's a lot about this that there is about any job that you do, and you know, it's as true with commentary as it is about anything else.
Thank you for being here today. The question is the sort of language that you would use, like for example, you wouldn't use, oh, the atmosphere in here is absolutely mental. Is there sort of particular sort of language that you might use to a particular experience, or to anything with that's going on the pitch that doesn't really sound like mad, or sound a little bit like the audience won't understand, or the audience might find a little bit too rude or impartial?
Yeah, there is definitely, you know, words like mental, crazy, wild. You've got to qualify them. I certainly things like disastrous, catastrophic, tragedy, words like that. I would not use personally, or if I did, because sometimes you will drop a word in that because it's live broadcasting, that it. You know automatically, you think, not sure I should have done that, then you can always say, say you said it's a disaster. You can say in footballing terms, it's a disaster for them. But I think with everything that's, particularly at the moment, with everything that's going on, Ukraine or wherever it happens to be, that you do have to be very careful with your language, yeah. And that is something else that we do very much get schooled in at the BBC. That is one of the areas where there has always been strong advice on being careful with language, particularly at times like there are at the moment.
John, I was very impressed with your take on the World Cup in Qatar and the fact that there has to be a backdrop that hasn't always been there in the past. And just to follow up on that, I just wonder, given that we saw Infantino's statement the other day about how now it's time to forget about everything other than football, whether you and the BBC are experiencing any sort of pushback, any pressure on you to not go into those areas, and maybe you can't tell us, but I just wonder behind the scenes, is there a real tension there?
Well, I feel that at the moment, I feel that's building, and I think it'll continue to build over the course of these 2 weeks in the build-up to the tournament. But strangely, we had a meeting last week, and you know, there was I think it was a unanimous view that it is important for us to be able to say how we feel when we're there. So I would say the opposite. And I know that there are more meetings coming up over the course of this week with more advice. And I know, for example, I've got an interview to do with The Guardian later this week about the World Cup. And I know that that's not just going to be about football. And I know that there will be some tricky questions to answer about that and about how we feel about going to the World Cup. Or I might be wrong, but I suspect it will be. So yeah, I think it's vitally important for this World Cup. But at the same time, I'm also aware of the fact that many of the countries that will go to that World Cup will feel that the United Kingdom's foreign policy is not great. And the United States are at this World Cup. And many of the countries at that World Cup will rail against the United States and think that there are many things that they do that they shouldn't be doing. So I think comes back to the old impartiality line. I think you've got to bear that in mind and remember that there's always more than one point of view.
Hi John, thanks for coming today. It was interesting to hear what you had to say about the World Cup and about how you'd say typical audience at a World Cup might be slightly different this time round because of people's ability or inability to access the tournament. I presume mainly for financial reasons, possibly more so in this instance than perhaps geography. How do you think that'll have impact on sort of the atmosphere in the stadiums, and do you think that'll have an effect on the way that you prepare and commentate on matches because of the atmosphere and how different it would be, say, if it was in a European country, for example?
Well, I think one thing that was quite striking this weekend, which again goes back to the kind of question that you were asking, is did you see the protests from the German supporters this weekend calling for people to boycott the World Cup? So a bit, stands full of people with banners calling for the World Cup to be boycotted. And I think obviously that relates to the human rights aspect of things, but I think also the cost of it, the accessibility, the fact that it almost feels that this World Cup is not for the normal fan, doesn't it, in some ways? And I think that I'm not sure how we're actually going to be able to watch it in Qatar from what I can work out. I'm not sure that it's going to be freely available on televisions within Qatar as well. But I think when it does start here, and I think we've got a fortnight now of that kind of feeling building, and I'm very interested to see where that goes and how far that goes, and how much there is a pressure on those who are going to to think about whether they should be there or not. But when the football starts, I mean, it will change. When the football starts, it's so intense. The schedule is so intense with match after match after match after match. I think that will take over to an extent.
I've got a question for you, John. I just wondered, obviously, you're my favourite football commentator.
That's the right answer.
It's the right answer. But I'm wondering how you use those skills and you commentate on other things, because, of course, during the Queen's funeral, you were doing the commentary on that. And I'm wondering, being a sports reporter and a sports commentator, does that help you being able to commentate in other things that comes along in the job?
Yeah, yes, I was there. I was there at the Queen's funeral a few weeks ago for the procession to the Lying in State, and actually on the day of the funeral I was in Parliament Square, as were quite a few of my colleagues, the sports broadcasters, because the powers that be at the BBC wanted that radio broadcast to be a programme of record of what was happening on the day and how it looked, and therefore many of those who they turned to on that day were the sports commentators, because of, I guess, the ability to be able to say what you see, which is, after all, that's what it is I do. If you boil it down, what I'm doing is I just say what I see, really. That's the very most basic thing of what I do. And again, it's something that over a period of time and over a period of years of doing it, you just get used to be able to describing the scene in front of you. And you know, that's what I like when I listen to football commentary when I was growing up. What I liked was being given that feeling of that there was something special going on. And that's why I particularly enjoy going to cover matches overseas in places that I might never go to again, and trying to give that feeling of what is it like being there? What is it like? Like last week in Marseille, the morning of the match, went down to the beach in Marseille and just seeing what it was like and just looking around. So I'm on the beach in Marseille. You've got the various islands off the coast. I look inland, there are hills there. You've got the stadium sitting there, and what the temperature's like, what the vibe is like, what it feels like. And I'm thinking that morning, that's the kind of thing that I want to be saying in the commentary. Not to dominate the commentary, but I want it in there. I want to do that, and I want to be able to describe what is it like sitting here in Marseille. And exactly the same with the Queen's funeral. What is it like? And you know, for the procession, the first procession to the lying in state, when the coffin had come back to London, and the next day it was taken through the streets of London to Westminster Hall, where the lying in state was. We'd been to the rehearsals, which were actually during the middle of the night. So we went. So we're actually in the middle of the night. It was what you saw on the TV screen, that parade that took place in the middle of the night, full dress rehearsal, bands playing, the whole lot in the middle of the night. So we were there. So we'd been to that. So I had an idea, and I knew what it was going to look like. But when it came to actually commentating on it, the one thing that was different was in the rehearsal, it was just a black box that was on the gun carriage. But when I was in the commentary box in the cenotaph. At the cenotaph, when it came down, the thing that was different was it was the coffin, and it had the royal standard, and it had the imperial state crown on it. And even though the whole ceremony was going on behind it, and the king's there, and Prince William, Prince Harry, everyone else, I couldn't take my eyes off the actual coffin and the crown on top of the coffin. So that's what I found myself describing, because that's what I was drawn to. And I felt that, you know, that it felt like that was the right thing to do at the time. And it's just picking out detail like that. And commentaries, very often you're looking at the wider scale, but very often it's talking about the tiny details like that within a commentary. So yeah.
I've just got one final one before we wrap up. We've got Mark Chapman here tomorrow morning. Yep. If there's one question I should be asking Mark Chapman, what would it be?
Well, now then, where do we go with that? Well, I was saying to Paul that I think he's at the FA Cup draw tonight, isn't he? Yeah. I'll tell you what the question you could ask him is, how many Mark Chapmans are there? Because he's covering the Rugby World Cup. He's on 5 Live half the time. He does a podcast for The Athletic. He presents Match of the Day. He is presenting on a Saturday afternoon. He's then on TV Sunday night. He's doing this Rugby League World Cup. He's going to the World Cup. So how does he do it?
Thank you very much, John. That's
Thank
fantastic.
You.